Is the Undertaker afraid of cucumbers?
Yes. It's the strangest thing. I almost don't want to admit that. How many people have you heard this before? Like, I heard Bruce Pritchard talking about it, and I was like, oh man, I don't know if you talk about The Undertaker that way. You know, it'd be like admitting to someone that Superman has a weakness for kryptonite, right? And we'll probably get into this, amazing run that The Undertaker and I had, especially, helped in great part by Paul Bearer turning on The Undertaker at SummerSlam 1996. And man, I got to tell you, like, he was always in that 100% invested in that character. There was no messing around, And Paul Bearer and I would go out every single night, and every time that music, we'd hear that gong, human nature being what it is, every eyeball in the arena would turn to The Undertaker. And then Paul would look at me knowing nobody's looking at us, and he would roll up his shirt sleeves, and he would show me that his hairs were standing on end. And then I've got some naturally hairy forearms anyway, but they'd be standing on end. Like, there was never a single evening where either one of us took it for granted, like what an honor it was to be out there, like what a unique, moment in time that we had. And Paul Bearer was all business too, liked to have fun and like to cut up backstage, but man, he was in that character. And then he would always, the one night we go to the ring and he's curiously, closed mouthed, like literally his mouth is closed. And we get out to the ring and he doesn't say anything to me. Undertaker's music goes, he rolls up his shirt sleeve, I show him my hairs. Undertaker comes down, he's got that great, amazing entrance, this brings up the hands and the fireworks go off and the lights, come up. And then all of a sudden, Paul Bearer opens up his mouth to reveal a slice of cucumber on his tongue. And the supernatural Undertaker starts dry heaving in the middle of the ring. It's like, I don't know if you guys have ever been to one of my live shows. I drop one F-bomb during the course of an evening. I try to stretch it out like it's a finishing move, right? Don't know how I'll go into it tonight, but like I think in curses all the time. And I was like, what the F is going on here? It was like something out of the Twilight Zone. This guy has a weakness. I don't know where it stems from. I really don't. And he had to go backstage, compose himself. And he was angry at Paul Bearer after that.
I did, just for the record, in the brief time that I was allowed to go near Undertaker, I said it. So first of all, I really want, has anybody seen the gif of Undertaker as Fraser Crane? And it's him at the piano, but just like with the Undertaker's like Brock Lesnar laugh face. The temptation was real to show him, but I didn't. But I chose I was like, okay, the cucumber thing. Like, what's that all about? And he just said, I had an incident once with a cucumber as a child, and I thought, I don't even want to know. That's enough. Anyway, so cucumbers aside, because you and Undertaker have something in common, that you both wrestled in WCW, both of you were underutilized, and then eventually went on to WWF and became big stars. But he's in WWF, he's wrestling these atrocious people, like King Kong Bundy, who just looks like a giant fat egg in a singlet. Giant Gonzalez, who was 7 foot tall but had no physique, so they had to give him a furry...
7'7", 7 feet 7 inches tall, yeah.
But then in 1996, you come into the WWF, and you debut the day after WrestleMania, but the day before you go to WWF and start your program with The Undertaker, you go to Disneyland. Talk about that 24-hour period of going to Disneyland.
I can do that. Yeah, when I joined WWE, and forgive me if I touch briefly on some things I may have covered before in 20 years of hell, but I think some of it's important to know is that I was not supposed to be a star in WWE. I had it on good faith that Mr. McMahon wasn't a fan of mine at all. And I think the direct quote was, Cactus Jack will never step foot inside a WWE ring. So as Mick Foley, I stepped inside as Mankind, right? And even then, it was just a concession to Jim Ross. Bruce Pritchard told me this about 4 years ago, JR would bring up my name at every booking meeting as potential talent. And finally, Mr. McMahon in the fall of 1995 slammed his hand down on the table and said, "All right, I'll bring him in, but I'm covering up his face." And it wasn't until yesterday that I saw someone wearing a 1996 Royal Rumble shirt that I remembered the only reason I was allowed to come in. So I take it he was going to bring me in, but was waiting for a look in a way that he could cover my face with style. The Undertaker, in one of many instances showing enormous fortitude, when he fractured his orbital bone working with Mabel, instead of taking time off like a normal human being would do, he worked with a broken, fractured orbital bone. They didn't want to put him under the hockey mask, because they wanted something fancier for him. So they had the creative team come up with some prototypes for some masks, and they ended up going with almost like a Phantom of the Opera type of mask. One of the prototypes they did not use that Mr. McMahon liked was the mask that ended up becoming the Mankind mask. So not only would I not have gotten my break in WWE had it not been for The Undertaker, had I not been paired with The Undertaker for that initial run, I might be any number of places, but there's no way I'm here, right here in Glasgow, Scotland, like 23 years after the fact. And I have to believe, I was a huge fan. When I saw this character debut in 1990, I knew on one level, yeah, this is the same guy they used to travel with, I used to room with, whose parents' house I stayed at in Houston. But in another sense, it was like, this is something altogether new. It was, to me, he's the greatest character-driven performer that the wrestling business has ever seen. And I only use this phrase in the most positive sense when I say I'm marked out, the suspension of disbelief is all important in professional wrestling, and he made it so easy to do that. I'd come running for the TV when The Undertaker was on, to the point I mentioned this to Kenny, I went a 6-year stretch with only seeing him once. And that one time showed you how into the character they were. The Undertaker and Paul Bearer actually traveled in a hearse for 2 years, like a souped up hearse. And I'm on the road doing independent shows, and I see this one and only hearse going through a drive-through at McDonald's. Can you imagine being the person working the window and a hearse shows up with The Undertaker in it? And I literally got out of my car and started chasing it like I was a 12-year-old girl at a Justin Bieber show. It's me, man, do you remember me, And I got the call. Went in to visit with Mr. McMahon. He laid out this idea for a character. I wondered why they would choose to cover up my facial features, because I thought it meant a selling point. He managed to lie his way into making me believe that something was, possible. And I really applied my, can I tell you about what he said to me? Luckily, somebody in creative told me the name they had figured out for me was the Mutilator, right? The Mutilator, to the point where going to Disney when I showed up at WrestleMania 96, I had an information packet. All it said was Mutilator on it. So Mr. McMahon sees me. Now it's about the third time that we've met, and he goes, "Do you know your name?" And I lied. I said no. And he goes, "In this business, we've had crushers, we've had destroyers, we've had executioners, but we've never had a mutilator." And that's what you are. And then he gave me the first name of Mason. Mason the Mutilator is instant death in this business, okay? I guess in defense of Mr. McMahon, it was actually the Mason the Mutilator experience. But he goes, "What do you think?" And this is where it pays to be tactical. I went, "I like it. I like it a lot. But what if instead of Mason the Mutilator, it was Mankind the Mutilator?" And Mr. McMahon had a yellow notepad, and he took notes. "Yeah, I'm not sure I understand." I said, "That way we can have a double meaning. We talk about the future of mankind, the destruction of mankind." And I was throwing all these ideas at him, because by the time I got to WWE, I had 11 and a half years of traveling the country and the world. And I had enough confidence to where I could, stand up to this larger than life billionaire and feel like I had something to offer. But until I showed up, until I had my debut, I was given that packet that said mutilator. I didn't know what they were going to do. I debuted that day after WrestleMania. I hear Howard Finkel's voice say, "Coming down the hill, Mankind." No mutilator. Then the match ends with Bob Holly. In comes the gentle piano music because I had told Mr. McMahon that I wanted to be the first person to have a separate set of exit music. And he said, "Okay, why?" I said, "Because I envision this character as like only feeling complete after he's caused human suffering." And he wrote that down. He took every one of my suggestions. He took, but I didn't know going in if he was going to take any of them. But the Disneyland thing is, I got the packet, right? And now they have WrestleMania week. It runs for 6-7 days. Back then it was probably 3 or 4 days. And I look at my sheet and there's nothing on it. There's absolutely no activities whatsoever. And meanwhile, I've just turned my room into bunk beds, so I've got plenty of room for activities. Any Step Brothers fans out there? And I'm just looking out the window at the Hilton in Anaheim. I'm just looking at Disneyland for 4 days. And finally, it's the morning of WrestleMania. I was like, there's worse things a guy could do on the road than go to Disneyland without his children. So I did. I went, and honestly, the only people who knew who I was would be like those hardcore WCW fans who would remember Cactus Jack. I showed up the next day, picked up a Leon White, Vader. WWE will pick up the room at WrestleMania, at SummerSlam. When you do media appearances, they pick up the room. But you're responsible for your own incidentals. So in 5 days in a Hilton hotel room, I had racked up less than $50 in expenses, right? A couple of room service meals, I've got protein bars and things like that. Leon says, "Can you just hold my stuff for me?" And I look at Leon's receipt. It's $2,600 in that same 5-day period. And I know that we are short-lived rooming, road mates, because he liked to live at a certain standard that I did not, And we got there. Jerry Briscoe pulls me aside, and he said, "What can you do to The Undertaker?" And I said, "I can drop an elbow off a TV truck." And Briscoe goes, "We know you like to do some strange things. There may come a time when we ask you to do one of those strange things, but until that time, we ask you not to do any of those strange things." And so I ran in when he was wrestling JBL, who was under Justin Hawk Bradshaw at the time. I ran in, I interfered, man, my heart was pounding. I've got this mask that made breathing really difficult. I had wrestled Bob Holly, and I hated it. I went on a payphone. Nobody had cell phones at that time, and I whining and crying to my wife. I was like, "I hate this mask, I don't want to do it. Maybe if I can just do it for 3 or 4 weeks, they'll let me be Cactus Jack again." But this is like, I have to go back to 91 when I jumped out of a gift box and attacked Sting. Like, these are the 2 biggest moments in my career. Attacking Sting, attacking Undertaker. And man, you go all in. It's like Mr. Miyagi said, you stay on one side of the road, you're fine. You stay on the other, you're fine. Get in the middle, you get squashed like a grape. So you either commit completely 100% to that character or you don't do it at all. And I committed, and Undertaker committed not just to his character, but to mine. And we made an impact that night to the point where Diamond Dallas Page called up Eric Bischoff and said, "Bro, that's going to draw." And it did. Thank you.
So you guys had this crazy series of matches where they had this idea back then, which is a novel idea, that the new guy comes in and beats the established guy. It's a great idea that would be nice if they implemented today. But but you come in, you get to beat the Undertaker in at least SummerSlam, and you guys have a boiler room brawl.
Right.
First ever boiler room brawl. And Paul Bearer, the tubby manager of the Undertaker for 6 years, turns on him and joins you. Why?
Man, well, when I went to, that was beginning of April when I attacked the Undertaker. So we were going up and all across the United States. We were having really good matches. The Undertaker doesn't like to call anything in the back. And I think that makes things more interesting. You get more caught up in the moment, making every moment as important as you can instead of trying to remember you're reacting. And of course, when you go around the loop, you start picking up things, and there are little patterns you get. But we started off nothing, going out there, getting a feel for what it was like, and it was pretty clear that we had some chemistry right away. And I have to believe, even though I saw Taker tonight, like I still couldn't ask him. I don't want to know. I just have it in my head that he was tired of the guys that he was being matched up with because they were taller than him or heavier than him. And I think he was the one who stood up. Although Mr. McMahon may have been on the record as telling Jim Ross that the only reason he was hiring me was so Jim could find out how it feels to have his heart broken by someone he thought was so good. It turns out to be, then he referenced me in a very naughty word. But I think the Undertaker stood up and was like, I can do business with this guy. And so we were having these great matches. I was on the losing end of all of them. We show up in Milwaukee for our first pay-per-view, and why you remember the details we do, I don't know, but the Undertaker had an ingrown hair on his chest, and he was picking at it as he started creating this vision of what might take place. And I could have sworn he said, I had to go back and say, what did you say? Because it sounded to me like he said something that sounded something like I was winning that night. I said, did you say? And he nodded his head. And I was like, it never even crossed my mind. Never even crossed my mind. And I remember in 1990, Undertaker wasn't being used too properly. This is before he became one of the skyscrapers. And he got a tour of New Japan as Punisher Dice Morgan. And he did well there. He's an athletic, big guy. He can walk across the top ropes. He can do anything. And he thought New Japan might utilize him in a way that WCW was not. And at that point in his career, all he wanted to do was get some tours of Japan and make a living. Same way in 1994, 95, after I'd left WCW on my own, I knew WCW didn't want me back, and I knew I wasn't a WWE guy. I actually wanted to go talk to WCW about letting me come in on Monday nights and put people over on TV, like a glorified enhancement guy, while simultaneously working for ECW and doing my tours for IWA Japan. It was Paul Heyman who told me two things. I can't have you losing on TV there and working for me here. And the second thing, he's like, you are so much better than you realize. You have so much more potential than you realize. You cannot put yourself in a situation where you think that's the limit for you. But at that time, the same way Undertaker was in 1990, I just wanted to make a living doing this stuff. Neither one of us visualized the heights that the business would go to and that we'd be right up there as high as it could get. I still think I'm just fortunate to have been near the top of that wave. When the Attitude Era crashed on shore, and I was kind of along for the ride. Doesn't mean I didn't do my part. Doesn't mean I didn't steal my share of shows and have some great rivalries. But I was really fortunate to be there with a group of 5 or 6 extraordinary human beings, all hitting their peak at the same time. And so I did win that match. I did win the match at SummerSlam. 2 wins, 98 losses. I never won another match, but I never needed to win another match because with Paul Bearer by my side, it was like when Mr. McMahon decides to strap a rocket to you, they send out a sign to the audience that this is someone to be taken seriously. And it was like, that's a way of showing the audience, yes, this is a rivalry you need to pay attention to. But I also was thinking earlier today, 1996, I'm literally in the boiler room, waiting to have this match in Cleveland, Ohio. We don't know if Undertaker's making it because he hasn't signed his WWE contract. I don't think anyone even knows that. I remember Michael Hayes saying there might not be a match. I was like, what do you mean it might not be a match? He says, Taker hasn't signed his contract. He's this close to going to WCW in 1996. We can only guess as to what character they would have turned him into there, right? The place where good gimmicks go to die. WCW. They basically gave away the store. They let Undertaker go, they let Dustin Rhodes go, they let Steve Austin go, they let me go, they let Kevin Nash go until Kevin came back 8 years later for 20 times the money. And I was there, 6 years later, I was there when Kevin told me he went in for a meeting with Ole Anderson. Ole was the booker, and Kevin said, this business isn't for me. I just want to call it quits. And Ole's like, God damn it, then just quit. And he goes, I really need the closure. And he asked Ole if he would sign off on his contract, which Ole did, and then Kevin joined WWE that afternoon. So literally, we got to thank WCW for not having the presence of mind to understand talent when it was right in their midst, or else there would be no Attitude Era. I know it's a long-winded answer to your question about winning that match, but I think those two key victories really gave me momentum, and it didn't matter what I did from then or how many times I lost. There was always the threat that I could win at any time. And even if I wasn't winning, I was throwing a fireball in the Undertaker's face, or we were making history, as we did in '98 in a match I'm pretty sure we'll talk about shortly.